Hello student, welcome in today's session. Today we are going to learn what is cardiac output, what is stroke volume and how the cardiac activity is regulated, that is regulation of cardiac activity. That come to the point, what is the firstly stroke volume. For calculating our cardiac output, we should know the stroke volume first. In last video, we have seen about the pumping action, internal structure and the mechanism of cardiac activity. How cardiac activity is mechanized or how cardiac activity is carried out in our body, and therefore their output, it is in the form of cardiac output. Cardiac output means how heart put up its output or how many amount of blood pumped by that heart during the each heart rate. Cardiac output, it is calculated by one of the formula, that is stroke volume into heart rate. And how it is, remembering that stroke volume into heart rate. That firstly we should know the stroke volume. आपण सर्वात आधी stroke volume काय आहे ते बघूयात. Then heart rate. That heart rate or heartbeat means one particular systole, that is one contraction of heart chamber and one relaxation of heart chamber. Collectively it is called as one heartbeat. One contraction and simultaneously one relaxation is called one heartbeat. That means one systole and one diastole completes the one heartbeat, and the beats per minute, that is the 72, it is the heart rate or it is the beat rate, or it may be also called as a pulse rate. What is pulse? When heart, fourth chamber of heart contract itself, then the way of contraction is passes from SA node to AV node to bundle of His to Purkinje fiber up to the myocardium of the heart, and this way of contraction it reaches up to the arteries and veins by the baroreceptor. That way of contraction when passes through the blood vessels, through the vascular system, that create a pulse in the arteries, that is called pulse. And how many waves of contraction that created in the arteries, that is called as pulse rate. Pulse rate and heart rate, it is one and the same, that is 72 to 80 beats per minute, 72 to 80 pulse per minute. एका मिनिटात जवळपास 72 ते 80 हार्टबीट होतात, किंवा एका मिनिटात 72 ते 80 वेळा एक वे ऑफ कॉन्ट्रॅक्शन आर्टरीमध्ये पास होते. दॅट इज द हार्ट रेट. व्हॉट इज देन स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम? स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम काय असतं बघा. द व्हॉल्यूम ऑफ ब्लड पंप बाय ईच वेंट्रिकल, प्रत्येक वेंट्रिकल. व्हॉल्यूम ऑफ ब्लड पंप बाय ईच वेंट्रिकल when each ventricle pumps a volume of blood during its systole. What is systole? The contraction of a heart chamber, it is called systole. What is ventricular systole? When ventricles undergoes the contraction, that is called ventricular systole. And during the systolic activity of ventricle, during its contraction, what happens exactly? Right ventricle pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs by pulmonary trunk or pulmonary artery. जेव्हा राईट वेंट्रिकल कॉन्ट्रॅक्ट होतं तेव्हा ते काय करतं? इट पंप्स द ब्लड टू लंग्स. लंग्सला ब्लड पाठवतं. कोणतं? डिऑक्सिजिनेटेड. कुणाद्वारे? पल्मनरी ट्रंक किंवा पल्मनरी आर्टरीद्वारे. राईट वेंट्रिकल पंप्स deoxygenated blood by pulmonary trunk or pulmonary artery to the lungs for oxygenation. And what happens with the left ventricle? Left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood through the systematic aorta to each and every body cell, to each and every body tissues or the every organ of the body. Left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood by systematic aorta to all over the body. And right ventricle pumps deoxygenated blood by pulmonary trunk to the lungs for oxygenation purpose. And the volume of each ventricle, maybe a deoxygenated blood, maybe a oxygenated blood. Volume of blood pumped by each ventricle during their contraction, during their systole, it is 70 ml. 70 ml असतं ते प्रत्येक वेंट्रिकलचं. पण आपण कॅल्क्युलेशनमध्ये एकच फिगर घेतो इथं. दॅट स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम मीन्स when ventricles contract, the volume of blood during their contraction. Right ventricle, how many amount of blood contract by the ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation, and how many volume of the blood pumped by left ventricle for all over the body, and it is called as stroke volume. त्याला आपण काय म्हणू, stroke volume म्हणू. In each heartbeat, how many blood pumps by each ventricle during its ventricular systole. त्यांच्या कॉन्ट्रॅक्शनच्या दरम्यान प्रत्येक वेंट्रिकल किती ब्लड पंप करतं एका हार्टबीटमध्ये, त्याला आपण काय म्हणू, दॅट इज कॉल्ड स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम. अँड वन हार्टबीट मीन्स वन कॉन्ट्रॅक्शन अँड वन रिलॅक्झेशन. प्रत्येक वेळेस जर 70 ml ब्लड पंप होता असेल वेंट्रिकलकडून, मग ते अशुद्ध रक्त असो का शुद्ध रक्त असो, त्यावरून आपल्याला काय कॅल्क्युलेट करतो, तर वी कॅन कॅल्क्युलेट द कार्डियक आउटपुट बाय नोईंग द स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम अँड हार्ट रेट. वी आर नोईंग द हार्ट रेट, that is the 72 beats per minute, or it is also called as pulse rate. When heart chambers or ventricles get contract, that way of contraction, it reaches up to the vascular system, arteries and veins, and that create a pulse in the every arteries. Therefore it is also called as pulse rate. Heart rate and pulse rate, it is one and the same. Then cardiac output is equal to stroke volume into heart rate. Stroke volume किती आहे, stroke volume, it is 70 ml. 70 ml into 72, 70 गुणिले 72 is equal to 5040 ml. The volume of blood or the cardiac output, it is calculated in ml, milliliter मध्ये calculate होतं ते, and that is 5.040 liter. It is exactly about 5 liter, which is the total volume of blood content in a human body. In an average adult person, the cardiac output is nearly about, on an averagely about 5 liters. 5 लिटर आहे. कसं काढायचं कार्डियक आउटपुट, स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम इंटू हार्ट रेट. हार्ट रेट 72 आहे, स्ट्रोक व्हॉल्यूम किती आहे, 70. कसं कॅल्क्युलेट केलं, प्रत्येक वेंट्रिक्युलर कॉन्ट्रॅक्शन दरम्यान वेंट्रिकल किती ब्लड पंप करतात. राईट वेंट्रिकल लंग्सला किती ब्लड पंप करतं, लेफ्ट वेंट्रिकल टोटल बॉडीला किती ब्लड पंप करतं, किती अमाऊंट आहे ते 70 ml. Therefore stroke volume 70 ml into heart rate 72, that is 5040 ml. That means nearly about the 5 liter. Therefore cardiac output in an average adult person, it is 5 liter. ठीक है. Then come to the point, regulation of cardiac activity. How heart activity, cardiac activity or mechanism of heart is regulated. How heart works we have seen in last video, but that mechanism or working, how it is regulated day by day, minute by minute or second by second, त्या ॲक्टिव्हिटी परत परत कशा रेग्युलेट होतात ते आपल्याला बघायचे. वी आर नो दॅट ह्युमन हार्ट, इट इज मायोजेनिक इन नेचर. सम ऑर्गॅनिझम हॅव्हिंग न्यूरोजेनिक हार्ट, which means their heart, it is under the control of nervous system totally. That means the action of nerve fibers, the action of ganglions, the action of a mass of bundles of a nerve cell. But our heart, it is myogenic in nature, means the organism whose heart under the control of a specialized muscles, that is the cardiac muscles, the bundle of the muscles, that is the nodal tissue, and the autorhythmic fiber. When heart activity is controlled by a cardiac muscle, their nodal tissue, their autorhythmic fiber, it is called as a myogenic heart. दो आवर हार्ट इज मायोजेनिक, जरी आपला हार्ट मसल्सच्या कंट्रोलमध्ये असेल, वी आर हॅव्हिंग बोथ द कंट्रोल, नर्वस कंट्रोल, त्याला ऑटोनॉमस नर्वस सिस्टमचं कंट्रोल आहे, अँड वी आर हॅव्हिंग अल्सो केमिकल कंट्रोल, दॅट इज द हार्मोनल कंट्रोल अल्सो. जरी मसल्सवर चालत असलं तरीही दोन्हीही पुढचे कंट्रोल आहेत आपल्या हार्टला, की हार्ट नर्वस टिश्यूनी पण कसं कंट्रोल होतं. सध्याच्या रिसेंट शोधात असं आहे की दॅट नर्वस सिस्टम अँड द मस्क्युलर सिस्टम coordinately manage the heart activity, coordinately manage the cardiac activity. That heart, it is an myogenic in nature, it is under the control of specialized muscle, that is the cardiac muscle, but it is having a dual type of control. dual type of control, having a both type of control. One it is the nervous control and another it is the hormonal or chemical control. What do you mean by nervous control? There are three types of nervous system. That is the central nervous system, which include the brain and a spinal cord. Then that is the second one, autonomous nervous system, which control the parasympathetic and sympathetic ganglion, which having the connection of parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve fiber. You know that sympathetic nerve fiber, they increase the activity of any organ, they increase the activity or enhance the activity of particular area, and parasympathetic nerve fiber, they decrease the activity of particular area, particular muscles, particular nerve fibers. That parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve, they coordinately make the autonomous nervous system. And heart, the heart is controlled by a part of a hindbrain that is called as medulla oblongata, which is act as a cardiac center. महत्त्वाचं हार्ट कंट्रोल करणारं सेंटर ब्रेनच्या पाठीमागच्या भागात आहे, ज्याला आपण मेडुला ऑब्लॉंगेटा म्हणतो. Therefore, when an accident happen or when an injury to the hindbrain, it directly may result into death by a coma, by sudden decrease in the rate of respiration and circulation. कारण मेडुला ऑब्लॉंगेटा, पॉन्स वरुली, सेरेबेलम हे रेस्पिरेशन आणि सर्क्युलेशन कंट्रोल करत असतात. That cardio centers, it is in the hindbrain, that is called as a medulla oblongata, which act as a main cardiac center of the body. Then it control the heart rate by, बघा ह्या मेडुला ऑब्लॉंगेटाचं काम काय, हार्ट रेट कंट्रोल करणं कुणाद्वारे. इट कंट्रोल द हार्ट रेट बाय प्रोप्रायरो रिसेप्टार्स, बॅरो रिसेप्टार्स अँड कीमो रिसेप्टार्स. रिसेप्टार मीन्स रिसिविंग सेल्स. दॅट medulla oblongata having the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve fiber, and that nerve fiber reaches to the every organ, effector and receptor. Receptors means receiving cell, effector means showing effect on the tissues. That chemoreceptors means they are motivated, they are monitoring by their chemical changes. The cells which are monitoring body activity by the chemical changes. Baroreceptor, they are controlling the body activity by pressurized on the arteries and the veins, pressurized on the blood vessels. They create a pressure on the blood vessels. Baroreceptors means the cell which is affected by the change in pressure. And the proprioreceptors, they are again the vessels and limb completely which affect the limb and vessels region. That means that medulla oblongata control the heart rate by managing the limb and vessel region, then by pressure maintaining cells and by the chemical influencing cells, by the change in chemical influencing cells. Baroreceptor, just like a thermoreceptor, that means the cells which are showing effect by the change in temperature. That means a chemoreceptor, baroreceptor, proprioreceptor, they receiving the change in the that particularly pressure or chemical, and they control the cardiac activity. Then that means heart rate, it is changed when there is a change in chemical. That means when there is acidosis, when there is alkalosis. Then heart rate having the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve fiber. You know that heart to the SA node of heart. SA node, it is a muscle of a it is a mass of a cardiac muscle. Muscles bundle आहे ते कुठलं, सायनो-ऑरिक्युलर नोड. And to the सायनो-ऑरिक्युलर node, one of the main connection of a nerve which is the longest cranial nerve in the body, that is called as a vagus nerve, which is a type of a mixed nerve, that is the sensory as well as a that efferent as well as afferent nerve, sensory as well as motor. That means it receiving the changes and it also affect on the changes. That vagus nerve having a connection with the SA node. When vagus nerve, it is the tip of vagus nerve. Vagus nerve चं सगळ्यात टोक जिथं SA node सुरू होतं. Vagus nerve reaches up to the SA node, which is situated in the right atrium near the opening of superior vena cava, and it generate the way of a contraction for the working of a heart. and that SA node, it is affected by the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve, it is having a connection of sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve fiber. The tip of vagus nerveचा टोकाचा भाग, it secretes many hormones and the vagus nerve inhibit and stimulate the cardiac activity by controlling the SA node. SA node ला कंट्रोल करून सिम्पॅथेटिक आणि पॅरासिम्पॅथेटिक नर्व फायबरचे दॅट प्रोडक्शन करून नर्वस कंट्रोलने हार्ट काय होतं, कंट्रोल्ड होतं. देन हाऊ कार्डियक ॲक्टिव्हिटीज इट इज कंट्रोल्ड बाय अ हार्मोनल ऑर केमिकल कंट्रोल. दॅट वी आर हॅव्हिंग द स्पेशलाइज्ड टाइप ऑफ सेल tissues or organs in the body. They secrete something for the metabolism of our body and they are called as glands. Some glands, they are having duct to transport their secretion. They are called as exocrine gland, whose secretion are enzyme. Some glands do not having duct to transport their secretion, therefore they pour their secretion directly into blood. They are called as endocrine gland, and that endocrine gland secretions are hormones. Then that means the cardiac activity is also regulated by endocrine gland. The master endocrine gland, it is a pituitary gland and it controls all the activity of another endocrine gland. That again the vagus nerve, tip of vagus nerve, which is having parasympathetic and sympathetic connection, that secretes the two hormones, mainly two hormones, that is the adrenaline, also called as epinephrine, and acetylcholine, which helps in maintaining the cardiac activity. Adrenaline, it increases the heart activity. It increases the heart rate because it acts as a main vasoconstrictor of the body. It maintaining the glycogen and glucose concentration of the body. By that, it acts as a vasoconstrictor. It constricts the blood vessels. It contracts the blood vessels. It increases the heart activity. When there is a low BP, when heart activity is decreased, that term it is called as a bradycardia. Decrease in the heart rate called bradycardia, and in that condition adrenaline secretes. It is an emergency hormone. It is a stress hormone. When there is a need of the increased heart rate in the body during the emergency condition, adrenaline secretes and it modify the cardiac activity, heart activity. When there is a decrease in heart rate, that is bradycardia, adrenaline secrete to increase the heart rate, and acetylcholine, it decreases the heart activity. And when there is a need of a decreases heart activity, when there is a increase in the blood pressure, increase in the force of walls of a heart, increase on the force of a cardiums of the heart, that means when there is a tachycardia means increase in the heart rate above the normal. And when there is an increase in heart rate, that time in the tachycardia, there is a need to lower the blood pressure, lower down the activity of heart. That means when there is a tachycardia, increase in heart rate, acetylcholine is secreted to decrease the heart activity. While inspiration, heart activity increases by by adrenaline, and while expiration, heart activity decreases by acetylcholine. That is called sinus arrhythmias. टॅकिकार्डिया इन्क्रीज इन हार्ट रेट, ब्रॅडिकार्डिया डिक्रीज इन हार्ट रेट. टॅकिकार्डियामध्ये काय तयार व्हायला पाहिजे, ॲसिटाल्कोलिन, आणि ब्रॅडिकार्डियामध्ये काय तयार व्हायला पाहिजे, ॲड्रिनालिन. आणि बोथ मेंटेनन्स इट इज कॅरिड आउट इन वन हार्टबीट. ड्युरिंग इन्स्पायरेशन हार्ट रेट इन्क्रीजेस, ड्युरिंग एक्सपायरेशन हार्टबीट और हार्ट रेट डिक्रीजेस. दॅट इज कॉल्ड ॲज सायनस अरिथमॅस. त्याला आपण सायनस अरिथमॅस म्हणू. अँड दॅट बोथ हार्मोन्स सिक्रेटेड बाय द टिप ऑफ वॅगस नर्व अँड इट अफेक्ट द वर्किंग ऑफ सायनो-ऑरिक्युलर नोड. Both adrenaline and acetylcholine, they affect directly on that SA node. Adrenaline, it is controlling the heart activity by enhancing work of cardiac centers. That adrenaline secreted by the sympathetic nerve fiber. Now acetylcholine that secreted by the parasympathetic nerve fiber. Sympathetic nerve fiber increases the activity, parasympathetic nerve fiber decreases the activity. That right and left vagus nerve that decreases the heart activity by parasympathetic nerve fiber. Means by hormonal and chemical control, adrenaline increases cardiac activity and acetylcholine decreases the heart activity. They both act as a good neurotransmitter. In nerve cells, a gap is there which is called as synapses, which is filled by a neurotransmitter to transmit the impulse conduction in the nerve cell, and this hormone helps in the cardiac activity, helps in the heart activity. That SA node, it is controlled by these two hormones. Working of SA node, it is increases by the adrenaline, and working of SA node decreases by the acetylcholine. Then sodium and potassium ion concentration, when it is increases in body, that Na and K positive ions increases in our body, that decreases the activity of heart. And when sodium and potassium level in the body decreases, that increases heart activity. When there is a high BP, when there is a problems in the deep inhalation, that time, that means sodium and potassium level in the body, it is decreases. And when there is a decrease in the sodium and potassium level, a person given a saline, that is the dextrose or the sucrose plus sodium ion mixture, and the person feels well after some time by increasing their heart activity. In this way, the regulation of cardiac activity, it is done. Though heart, it is an myogenic in nature, it is controlled by both nervous and hormonal control. In this way, heart controlled its or heart regulate its activity by two hormones, that is adrenaline and acetylcholine, and by many receptors, that is proprioreceptor, baroreceptor and chemoreceptor, and two nerve fiber, that is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve fiber, and one main center, that is the medulla oblongata. Thank you student for today's video.